Good morning and welcome to the David and David on Real Estate podcast. Today we are in episode number 145 and we have Lena from New Venture Management with us. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Well, it's really exciting for us to have you on here. You've got so many talents and companies and experiences, and we're really excited to be able to pick your brain a little bit today, so you can share some of your experiences with us. I'm not even sure where we should. I think we
don't
need
disappoint.
10 topics today, but
David Corbin, when I first met Lena, I'm like, wow, what a wealth of knowledge. And I'm like, we're going to be doing a couple of podcasts together because the amount of topics and brainstorming and ideas and energies flying around the room is really insane. And when you meet people that are really aligned, it's easy, but we're going to make it fun today. Lena, you're dealing with, well, first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit, give us a proper introduction.
Oh, geez. Okay, so my name is Lena. My husband and I started investing in real estate in 2004. So we've been actively investing in multifamily properties in Ontario and actually in Cleveland, Ohio, for the better part of 20 years. Our specialty, or I should say my specialty, really is the restabilization of multifamily properties. We're talking 8 units right up to about 24. That's our sweet spot. And it's dealing with terrible tenants, kind of either getting them in line or having them leave of their own volition, restabilizing the units and turning that distressed property into a cash cow. That's been our niche. It's what we do, and I very much enjoy it. With that came obviously the start of a property management company. So we do the same thing that we do for ourselves for other investors as well. So we do have a lot of partners that we work with, same kind of deal. And we have a construction company. We do all kinds of fun things all in that real estate realm. And it really was just businesses built on a need for finding the right people that we didn't seem to be able to find on the outside. So we kind of created our own solution. And yeah, that's been 20 years. It's been awesome because we're still doing it. And I think it's just going to be even more fun as the time continues to pass.
Yeah, that's a lot, and it's a big basket of goods, but it's all interrelated, isn't it? It all centers around people and relationships. And you're really in that same sort of basket of goods where you're adding and you're growing and you're sort of building that ecosystem internally. And that requires a certain set of skill sets. It requires great people skills. It requires communication. It requires setting really clear expectations. So talk to us a little bit about that, because so many of our listeners, and this goes out to the realtors too, you're sitting 3 feet away from gold. I mean, real estate is probably the best mechanism to build wealth that is known to man throughout history. And realtors are sitting, literally on the edge of their seats, with keys to the kingdom. But very few of them use those keys and put that key in the door and unlock it, because I think there's this fear of dealing with people, fear of dealing with tenants, fear of the tenants not paying rent, fear of their quality of life being impacted. And it is a real fear, but there is a way to deal with it. There's a way to move forward. There's a way to really stay on top of those relationships. And it's something that when I talk to you, I feel like you just really thrive in that context. So let's talk about that.
Sure. So first, I would say definitely, especially in Ontario, a lot of those fears that you did mention, like you said, they are valid fears. And I think one of the biggest challenges investors, realtors, anybody in this landscape faces is they try to do everything on their own. One of the biggest reasons why I think my husband and I have managed to be successful for as long as we have been is because we both have different skill sets. My husband is a very systems man, right? He'll create policies, procedures, systems, automation. And I'm very much a people person. If I had to do that aspect of it plus the people aspect of it, I think we would have failed completely on all fronts. With regards to actual communication, things like that here in Ontario, first thing I'm going to say is I know there's a lot of really bad stories out there, but the first thing I think everybody needs to understand is that the majority, and I'm talking 90% or more of tenants in Ontario, are actually really good humans. They're not causing problems. Life happens, yes, sometimes, but they are people who, with you treat them with respect, are willing to communicate with you. They're willing to work with you. They're very open and honest about their situations. And their goal is to just do right by you and by themselves. So if we go in with the mentality of, oh my God, the tenants in Ontario are awful because the laws are in their favor, we're naturally projecting a certain attitude towards these individuals who are probably good people. They've just been treated badly, and now they're reciprocating because they've been triggered by past events. So one of the first things that we do, or I do, I should say, when I take on new property is I go in and I introduce myself to the tenants. I let them know that I'm their property manager. I don't tell them that I own the place or anything else. It just sets a different expectation. And I let them know that I'm here to start off fresh. I don't care what happened before. What I'm worried about is what happens between today and every day moving forward, because this is the start of our relationship. I let them know that I understand that there might have been things that weren't addressed in the past. There could have been situations that maybe weren't ideal. I don't care. I didn't want to know it from the owners. All I want to know is what's deferred in terms of a maintenance issue that is of a concern. What challenges have you been facing? And I need to see the condition of your unit today as is. And that's my starting. For them, it takes a little bit of pressure off of them, because let's just say there was damages or something that had been caused, and maybe it's causing them stress. They don't know how to deal with it, or there's issues that had blown up because of poor communication. This gives them an opportunity to start over. There's no baggage. There's no judgment. And it also gives them a little bit more in terms of a sense of responsibility to not continue behaviors that may not have been ideal in the past. I gave you a fresh start. That means if you caused $5,000 of damage in the last 18 months, I'm absorbing it, no questions asked. So I expect moving forward, there is no more of this behavior. And I'm very honest about this. I let them know this. I said, look, my job is to ensure that your rights are protected, as are the rights of the owners of this property. If the bank takes the property, you have nowhere to live, and you're going to have to go out into the wilderness, because the bank has a whole different set of rules that they get to follow. So we work together to make sure you stay housed and the people who own this place can afford to pay the bills. And if you're frank, very quickly, the bad apples show themselves. And then with those people, you become like their best friend. You want to know everything. You want to fix everything. You're not happy. How can I help you? And they go away. They don't want to deal with you. It's too much. And the good people, when they realize that, you know, this is somebody who values me as a human, they don't believe that they're above me, they don't think that they're better than me or I'm somehow lower, they now want to ensure that they're nurturing that relationship. And automatically that tension that initially starts, it goes away. And when it's gone, your anxiety subsides, their anxiety subsides, and you'll find that communication is very easy, and problems that maybe were present in the past slowly start to resolve themselves. So that would be kind of the first thing that I would say, is going with the mentality that they're all great people. What I know from experience is when you have a building of, let's say, 14, you'll have maybe one who's really genuinely a bad apple. You'll have 3 or 4 who kind of goes with the crowd. And then the rest of them don't say anything, and they don't leave because they can't. And the minute that they know that there's somebody there who's not going to tolerate the behavior, they all stand up. And those 3 that were going with the crowd suddenly go with that crowd. They improve their behavior, and that one bad apple finds themselves a new home.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, and I think you're bang on with. We don't hear about the good stories. It's not newsworthy. It's not, you know, cooler talk. It's nothing. It doesn't come up in my practice either. I never hear, you know, when things go smoothly, good tenants, nobody talks about them. It's the bad ones that that we have to deal with. And we've done a bunch of podcasts on investing and encouraging people to get that investment property, and realtors to, to look to invest that property. So we're definitely on that side of it. But what we hear back all the time is the problem situations and how you're going to deal with tenants. What if the tenant goes bad? What if they leave? What if they don't leave? What if they do damage? All this stuff. And for someone who's not in the business of being a property manager or something like that, and it's more of a one-off, or they got a couple properties, it can be a real nightmare and a real headache. And I'm always having the discussion with people, like, you have to have a stomach to be a landlord. It's not for everybody. But for those that don't have the stomach for it themselves, I think you present a great alternative, and that's you could be the owner investor, but get somebody else as a property manager that knows the ins and outs, that knows how to communicate with a tenant like you do, and can push the right buttons with the tenant and with the landlord. And you should add that layer to what you're doing. Now, if you're an owner, there's obviously a cost if you're going to hire a property manager instead of doing it yourself. But to me, it makes so much sense to do it because there's so many that would like to invest but don't have the stomach for it, right?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree that if you surround yourself with the right team, you will flourish. I talk about it a lot. I tell people, property management seems to be something that everybody leaves at the back end. They're like, you know what? Later, I can do it myself. But you could buy the work, like you could have, let's say, a house that you overpaid for, that you got terrible financing terms for. And if you have a property manager who understands how to manage that asset, not just fix the toilets, they can turn that into a profitable investment. And vice versa. You could get the best property. Your agent could bring you like cash on a silver platter and get you the best terms you could ever want. And if you decide to self-manage and you don't have the skill set to do it, you will destroy that asset and it will become your biggest liability. And we don't do it all. Like, I have never gone in and been like, you know what, I could save so much money if I just go off and get my real estate license and I just buy the properties and do it all. It's not something that I want to do because I don't have the desire to do what is required of me to be a very good real estate agent. And I recognize that. So I find the people who understand my language and I work with them. And investors need to do the same thing. You don't have to do everything at once. You have to find people who can work within your budgets and who can work within your goals and help you get there. Because what are you doing? An investor who doesn't understand becomes very emotional. They don't understand where their responsibilities come, where their lives, like where, everything has a certain set of rules and not all of it makes sense all the time. But your asset is somebody else's home. It is where their livelihood is. It is where their stability is. And we need to understand that it's our asset. It is our nest egg. It is our property. We own it, but it's somebody else's home. That's where let's say their heart is, right? Home is where your heart is. So if you go in and attack them and take away any sense of ownership per se to that person's not going to work with you. Versus if you work with them and you understand and you acknowledge that this is their home and you treat them as if it is, they will work that way. And sometimes the only way to do that is to remove yourself from the equation. So there's somebody else to sit there and say, look, I understand. And this is how we're going to manage the money aspect of it. But we also have to deal with the human aspect of it. So let me take care of that. And let me help you figure out the solution to the money. If, let's say, it's a situation where the tenant has paid rent late. And if you're working with people who understand from the beginning, they'll be able to have you set yourself up so that there is a contingency just in case, You, David, can come in there and be like, you know what, Lena, we're going to buy this property and it's a pretty big property and it's got a lot of work that needs to get done. So let's make sure we've got a little reserve here, because what happens if, right? And even if you're dealing with somebody who maybe doesn't have that same skill set, if they can pair you with somebody who does, if they can pair you with an asset or property manager who understands that, then that team together becomes very strong. And I really think that that's one of the things where as an industry as a whole, as investors, as real estate agents, if we all kind of find a way to work together to fill in the gaps instead of thinking that we have to do it all ourselves, I think that we could really just take this to a very different level and kind of, I don't know, dominate, for lack of a better word.
Len, I love the approach, and you're speaking definitely my language when you're talking about um, rehabbing and changing and repurposing, right? Because you're right. Like you can take an asset that is highly profitable, give it to the wrong hands. It doesn't take a lot to ruin that. But the reverse is also true. When you have the right team and you have people who know what they're doing, you can take an underperforming asset and renovate it, improve it, maybe put in air conditioners, whatever you have to do. But sometimes it's little things. It's focusing on the human aspect. It's maybe giving them a coat hanger when you first enter the door because there's no coat closet. Like it's really simple things that will make a big difference to their enjoyment, how they interact with the property, and how their quality of life changes because of the little touches that you've put on the property, because you took the time to listen and understand their situation. And all of a sudden your relationship, by putting in a $30 coat hanger or a coat rack or something as simple as that, or a door stopper, or maybe, a weather strip on the door because there's too much noise coming from the hallway, and their next door neighbor who wakes up 3 hours before them constantly interferes with their lifestyle. But it's these little things that when you listen and you're attentive and you have that great relationship, it can make the difference between a happy relationship between a tenant, landlord, and a property manager, and a strained relationship, and that can make all the difference at the end of the day.
Oh, I agree so much. I agree. That coat hanger right there, like you speak to my heart. I don't know why people don't value these coat closets when they're designing these units.
But having a property manager or a management company that understands these things and speaks that language and is able to, take an investor on the journey of understanding upcoming expenditures, understanding, what they can do to improve the property, like even the little things, that makes a huge difference to the bottom line.
I agree. And a real estate agent, a property manager, anybody on your team who is able to proactively plan versus reactively go in. So now I'm reacting to a situation versus I'm predicting and planning. If you have a proactive team, you will bear, it may be slow. Real estate is a slow growth game, in my opinion. And, you may buy one property a year, maybe two, and that's okay. But if you have proactive people, that slow growth will be exponential over time because your asset is constantly performing. It's consistent performance, even though it's slow, versus these spikes and dips. And it's just not my game to play. Some people enjoy it. I don't.
Then it's really speculation when you look at it.
Yeah. It really is.
We've seen what happened to the pre-construction market in the last 3 years, and I mean, I've seen it happen, when builders were not taking phone calls from realtors because they're above it all. I just said to myself, it's only a matter of time before that reverses. And everybody who's bought pre-construction units, I mean, you're speculating on market appreciation. You're focusing on, it's a one-trick pony, right? Whereas, like you said, when you focus on long-term creating wealth, they're not massive gains. But if you have 14 properties or even 3 properties or 2 properties, even when you're sleeping, you have consistent growth, consistent mortgage pay down, consistent cash flow, consistent market appreciation, right? Tax advantages. You have, there's so many profit centers that you're just enjoying as you're sleeping. And to me, that's the beauty of investing in real estate. That's why, I love being in this industry, and that's why I got my real estate license. And I'm in the position that I am because of all the benefits that investing in real estate has afforded us.
Yeah,
I agree.
There's two sides to what a landlord is supposed to be doing. David, you're emphasizing the investment side of it. What's good for the landlord. I'm in business to own this property. I'm collecting rent. I'm paying certain bills, expenses. and improving, making improvements, and just sleeping and making money on the equity, etc. But the other side is me as a landlord, I have an obligation to make sure I'm looking after my tenants and making sure that that's like Lena said, that's where they're living, that's their home. If there's a draft coming to the door, that's affecting them every day, right? If they don't have that hook on the door, it's annoying. So you have to be mindful that that's part of your role too as a landlord. Okay, you have an obligation, and even a legal obligation to the
Yes.
tenant to make sure that they have a certain minimum level of comfort and they're being looked after. So you can't just sit back, oh, I don't want to put a hook in, it's going to cost me money, I'm worried about the bottom line all the time. You have to look at what's good for the tenant too. You actually have an obligation to be mindful of that too, right? And then again, I think that throws it back to you. Like, that's where a property manager sometimes makes so much sense, because you're talking, you're listening, you're hearing all the stories of the tenant and how it's affecting their lives. And anybody's doing a one-off and wants to be a landlord and look after themselves, they got to make sure they're doing that too. They can't just sit back and say, oh, I'm collecting rent, paying property taxes, making a profit, and I don't want to talk to the tenant until their lease is up.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, and in Ontario, like we have a lot of rules that we have to follow. And not all of them are as commonsensical, if that's even a word, or logical as you would think. I joke. So I used to teach a property management course to investors many years ago, and we're doing it now online. But I used to start this by saying, okay, if we're going to think about the landlord and tenant board, and we're going to think about the Residential Tenancies Act, if it's logical and common sense applies, it's probably illegal. And I mean, it's a little bit extreme, but honestly, sometimes you're sitting there going, how is this not allowed? And it really is one of those things where, as landlords, not always, but sometimes we genuinely believe, and myself and my husband, we were guilty of this when we first started. And let me tell you, it was really, really bad those first few years. And we really just thought that it was like, okay, you have a property, you pay your rent. These are the rules that I gave you, and you're going to follow them. And that's it. I'm going to sit home and I'm going to make money and we're done. No, there are rules that we have to follow. And then there's certain obligations. Yes, tenants are going to make some of the most ridiculous requests sometimes. And what I would recommend is that we acknowledge this request. We don't tell them it's completely ludicrous at first. We just explain why this is not something that would be addressed right now, or why it's not something that needs to be brought to the attention of the office. And then if it continues, I genuinely do at times come back with, look, A, I'm not your mom, not my problem. B, like, sorry, this is like an adulting situation. So I promise if you just try really hard to adult, not always the nicest, but sometimes it's what's needed. But don't start that way. First, try and understand where the logic is coming from. But if your tenant calls you, the landlord and tenant board requires that either A, you have all of the documentation for policies, procedures, usage of things like toilets. Again, common sense, don't flush toys down the toilet. The landlord and tenant board, if you go to the board and you say, my tenant flushed a toy down the toilet, the first question they're going to ask is, well, did you tell the tenant they're not supposed to do that? And you kind of sit there and you go, I didn't realize I had to tell the tenant to do that. And they're like, well, if the tenant didn't know, how are they supposed to properly operate the toilet? This time, we're going to give them a warning. Now they understand. And if it happens again, come back. So you have to think about these things. So what we have like a 13-page, I mean, you guys obviously know, I don't know if everybody is aware, but we have a standard lease in Ontario that we have to use. It's 13 pages long. And then you're able to add additional clauses, addendums, whatever you want to call them, to said lease. Ours is 13 pages of additional paperwork because of, I need to explain, when I say no smoking, we're talking inhaling and exhaling any type of substance, because it has to be that basic. When I say no illegal activity, I'm talking about all of these things. And it's really interesting because sometimes you think about it, like I have clients in Ottawa who are professional athletes, they are diplomats and things like that, and they have to sign an addendum that says, you're not going to use my house as a brothel. And they kind of look at me and I'm like, this is standard because I've got property everywhere and I've got a different group that, I can't make special exceptions. But you have to know that you are obligated to give them the most basic common sense instructions if you expect them to follow it, and make sure that they sign it. Because if it's not signed and there is something that does occur and you're trying to recoup, the landlord and tenant board's first question is, well, did you tell them? And the answer of, I'm sorry, sir or madam, common sense would say, is not acceptable. So it's very important to understand these very basic things and to understand that everything needs to be very clearly documented. And as if you are talking to a 5-year-old who has, encountered, the kitchen sink for the first time. Like, please do not shove the carrots down the sink. Not a good idea. And just, it has to be that way. And it sounds insane. And I promise you, a lot of your tenants are going to look at you like you're insane. But your job, is to ensure that you're showing you're not discriminating. So I'm not treating one person like they don't know and another person like they do.
Right.
And you always want to focus on that one potential possible problem, knowing that 99 of them are never going to cause a headache. And just letting everybody know, look, it has happened once. This is why we now have this paper. And it's all true. It happened. So now I have to put it there. And they look at you going, really? Yeah, really. Never happened again, but just in case. And yeah, it's really important. It's really, really important to understand that. And just document it, make sure you have that paperwork, and understand that you are required to educate them. You are required to fix it the first time if you didn't educate them, and that's on you. So, don't automatically dismiss their requests. Like something so insane like light bulbs, right? We all know that Home Depot, Canadian Tire, the dollar store sells light bulbs. And we know that when a light bulb stops turning on, it's probably because it burnt out, and we need to go and buy the exact same light bulb and come back, take one out and put the other one in. Landlord and tenant board says, well, landlord, that's your responsibility. If your tenant asks you to come and change a light bulb, you have to. But it's a light bulb. Like, why? But that's technically my job. So what we do is we provide them with light bulbs, and we show them this bulb goes here and that bulb goes there, and this is how you change it. And if you need light bulbs, let me know and I will ship you another box, but I need you to take it from the box and put it in.
You better
Can we
make it
do
really
that?
clear whether it's counterclockwise or clockwise that you have to do.
Absolutely. You laugh, but I've had
when they're
tenants who,
taking it out, which way to go, and when they're putting it the next one in, has to be the opposite direction.
righty tighty, lefty loosey, basics.
I think we got to pick up on this. We got to discuss more about some of the legislation and the laws that affect
And hear
landlords.
more stories, David. I want to hear stories that Lena
Oh,
has about difficult tenants as well. I think we're going to get into that. So, Lena, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. We're going to have you back again. We're going to get into some great stories, and we're going to talk about legislation that you should know, that you probably don't know, but you should know as somebody that wants to go into dealing with tenants. Thank you guys for
thank you.
being with us, Lena. Thank you for being
Thank
with
you,
us
Lena.
as well, and we'll have you on next week to continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, guys.